Thanks, members. I'd like to welcome you all to the meeting of the Learning Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'd like to start the meeting. Apologies, please.
Apologies have been received from Councillor Alan Furser and Graham Smith.
Any other apologies? Item 2, declarations of interest. Can I bring in Delith Thomas, our legal officer, for some advice, please, Delith?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not aware of any interests that need to be declared by members, but if members have any questions, I'm happy to answer any queries. Thank you, Chair.
Can I declare that I am Chair of Governance at Nantcellyn School?
If you want, I mean, the item on the agenda is fairly general in respect of schools. Clearly, it's a matter for members if they wish to declare. If there are particular schools that come up in discussion when members are talking about particular items, then obviously members can declare interest relating to that school at that particular time as well. Thank you, Chair.
Can we move on then to item 3, minutes of the previous meeting? You have the minutes there in front of you, pages 5 to 14. Are you happy to accept the minutes there en bloc? Thank you. Item 4 there, the action sheet. You can see the actions there. Has everybody received the information they're requested? We move on then to agenda item 5, which is the summary of key decisions. You can see these on page 21. That's the decisions of the Head of Education. And number 2, decisions of the Executive Member for Education. Councillor Seaborn, did you have a query?
Okay. Well, it might be the same thing. It's just I'd just like to know how is it working out, and are there any problems regarding delivery? And the other thing is, who in the school signed the agreement?
Councillor Seaborn.
I was just wondering, Chair, whether I need to declare an interest in the exact members' decisions on Cwmbran High School. Yeah, I'm a governor and my wife is a governor.
I think I do that as well.
Okay, we move on then to agenda item 6, which is the self-evaluation report. We were expecting Dermot to come along for this. So.
If I may, Chair, while we're waiting for Dermot, are we expecting anybody from the EAS today? I find that rather surprising, given their crucial role in putting in the support that is required for the action plan, the improvement plan, to be successful. I mean, all the school improvement stuff is now delivered by the EAS, and I would have thought they should be here.
So I think members have agreed to take the attainment report at the next committee. Obviously, EAS will be a key factor in driving that forward in the future. So I think the intention is to get the EAS in at that point in time. We did receive apologies from Julian de Rostrup, who couldn't make the meeting.
I mean, obviously, I accept that explanation. It's just that as I read the report, a number of the things really hinge on in terms of judging the self-evaluation report, would depend in part on what would the EAS say about a particular assertion. And therefore, I was just surprised, that's all.
think we will be, bringing the EAS in for a full scrutiny quite soon. So.
If we reverted back to what we did before, it would be 12 o'clock.
Okay, can we now welcome Dermot McChrystal to the meeting? And we were hoping that you would give us a sort of 5-minute whiz through the self-evaluation report, please, Dermot. Whiz through.
Start the clock now. Chair, I will endeavour to give you the headline sort of key points coming out of the self-evaluation. Obviously, in terms of context, and I know everyone knows this, but it's worth just restating. Clearly, we're coming to the third of our, and hopefully final of our, monitoring visits from Eston as a result of the local authority being placed in special measures. We've already had the pre-agenda meeting with Eston, so we've got a good idea of what that process is going to look like. We'll be joined by 4 or 5 members of Eston in the team, starting on the 23rd of November. And clearly what we'll be looking to do, and the self-evaluation document goes to the heart of the discussion that we'll have with them, is to evaluate what progress we've made against each of the 5 recommendations in the original report and 2 other recommendations that they made subsequently. I would argue probably replicate a couple of the recommendations in the original 5. And are we now ready to be able to stand on our own in terms of taking the education service forward without the requirement for special measures? And that's obviously their part of what they do. It's then for the Minister to listen to the recommendation that Eston make as to what steps he feels might be required. That could be that we continue in special measures, which would mean we'd have a visit in a year's time from November.
So that's hopefully the final, but...
So the possible outcomes of that visit would be that we come out of the recommendations that we no longer require special measures. It could be that we require ongoing monitoring, which would mean a visit in a year's time. There wouldn't be the same sort of monitoring visits on a termly basis. Or, presumably, they could make a recommendation to the Minister that things have got much worse and he may want to consider further actions. Further actions would be, for instance, the removal of our statutory powers for education. So obviously at the moment we've got complete control of our statutory powers. Authorities such as Planning Command have lost theirs. So those would be the possible outcomes. So the document that you've got today was a draft, and we haven't finalised the document yet, so we're really keen to get members' input into the document. We have to register that in something called the Virtual Inspection Room, which is an online room basically full of all this key document, but then any other documentation and supporting evidence that we need to help the inspectorate understand what journey we've been on and what progress we've made. So we've got time to change this, is the key point. And if I go through each of the 5 original recommendations, we sort of pick up on the other 2 recommendations that were made coincidentally in other feedback from Eston. So recommendation 1 was around standards, and you'll see in the document there's quite a lengthy part of the document around where we are in terms of our performance. Clearly, we need to look at Key Stage 4 in particular, but not only Key Stage 4. And looking at our performance, we've made 13.5, 13.6% progress in terms of the level 2 plus indicator, which is the headline indicator that Eston will look at since 2011. So we've made really gratifying progress, and that has been sustained, that has been steady. There have been wobbles within it. It's not to say that every school's made sustained progress every year, but the clear trend and pattern is that we've made sustained progress over time. Obviously, however, I should say that's good progress. I think that's fair to say that is good progress, and that's what we've said. That gets us to adequate. That gets us to where we should have been all along. So it's really important for me to say, while I'm saying that's good progress, it isn't good enough yet. That's what children in Torvine and their parents and the community should have expected. So we are where we should be, more or less. We're a little bit below it, actually, but we're more or less there in terms of that indicator. So there's more to be done. Obviously, the results this year, we knew were going to be different for the teacher-assessed outcomes. That's reflected in the figures that you have. We, together with head teachers, and I think head teachers need the credit for being quite bold and brave, ahead of the curve of what's happening elsewhere in Wales, in really saying that, we agree we cannot be right in terms of the quality of our teacher assessment at the moment. We need to do something about that. I think we're year one, good start, in the sense that I never thought I'd be sat here saying this, but our performance has gone from first to 21st in terms of Key Stage 2, but I think that's much more accurate now. What you don't have in your pack, but has just become available, and we'll share this with members, is where we are now in terms of the national test outcomes and how those compare. So I think you'll see a downturn in performance. That's what we said would happen. We said would happen at Foundation Phase, Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3. And clearly the biggest issue that we have going forward is looking at performance in primary. Key Stage 3 is now, I think, much more rooted in a firm evidence base, and I think is pretty accurate. We have a bit more work to do there, and we're working with secondary colleagues on that. But we're getting there with secondary. We clearly have some substantial work to do with some, but not all primary colleagues, and that's the point. But some primary schools we need to really support. And we'll be meeting again with all schools in October. We had a date set, and then the Minister put a date in for something he was doing on the same date we'd set. So we need to rejig that to look at where do we go next. So a key issue for us going forward is how do we make sure that the quality of teaching in classrooms is really impacting on literacy and numeracy outcomes. So
we shouldn't get a nasty shock again.
So what we need to have is a plan, if you like, from preschool, all the work we do as a council, from Flying Start, because obviously Flying Start and all the early years world sits within education, of knowing where our pupils are, so that when any child goes into school, if anyone in the council, be it in the communities team, be it in social care, be it in education, comes into a school, that teacher and that parent understand the level of need that child has in a very simple way in terms of, particularly looking maybe at communication and social skills. So that's something we'll be working on. But then that progression of understanding and the tracking of the child's need continues then all the way through to 16 and beyond, and up to 24, 25. So key issue, though, for us is clearly where we're going in terms of literacy and numeracy, and as I say, that's something we're working closely with schools on at the moment. So in terms of recommendation 1, I should say as well, we clearly are making good progress around free school meals, some strong performance there, not good enough yet, gap is still too wide. We know we've made some progress with the gender difference in terms of boys' attainment, for example, but we have a lot more to do there. We've made some very strong progress around vulnerable groups. The LAC population, in fact, we just had Eston with us this morning as part of a thematic review, so we've, in fact, I think he's still there, one of our Eston colleagues looking at how we're working with social care and other colleagues around how we're supporting LAC youngsters. Always a difficult one to track year on year because not always the same population. What I would say for our LAC group is that we know our children extremely well. We're really well placed to intervene in a very timely fashion and with a range of strategies that we know impact. And even though performance isn't where it should be, I think we're really well placed in terms of the work we're now leading on with the rest of the consortium around the use of the pupil deprivation grant for LAC, one of our officers.
Sorry,
So I
it's
looked
one
after
of the-
children.
Yeah, I know. I knew it.
Acronyms. Sorry.
Yeah,
That's because I've been with the inspections this morning. So we've got some more work. Always, you will never get it right, and we'll never be comfortable in terms of absolutely getting it absolutely spot on for every looked after child. But we are making good progress there. In terms of Gypsy Travellers this year, you might have seen in the report we've had some really strong outcomes for our Gypsy Traveller youngsters. Arguably, because we haven't got the national figures yet. Yeah, 12 A-stars days.
Yeah.
We're talking about 57 qualifications now. That's really good performance. We're really, really proud of what those youngsters and all the staff who work them and their families have achieved.
Yeah.
But a lot to be done still. That only takes us to adequate, and I think that's the point. That's what we're saying in this report. We have changed some of the language, I should say, Chair, as well, in that I think we've said in this version of the SCR that we're at least adequate. I think that's probably... that was in discussion with the Recovery Board, to be fair, not to blame someone else for the phrase, but I think they were trying to say, well, there's some good and excellent examples coming through of practice as well. But overall, I think we've reflected again and thought, no, we're adequate, and our prospects for improvement are good, particularly based on standards. Okay. Joe, is it worth me pausing at each one, or do you want to just rattle through the five and then...
Okay, are there any questions on that topic?
Excuse me.
If I could, yeah, I mean, you've made quite a bit about the Key Stage 4 inclusive, which is the primary indicator on where it looks. But do you think it would be a fair criticism for me to say that it looks like our improvement in maths A to C star and English A to C star is greater than our improvement in the inclusive? And what are we trying to do to... Because obviously what we're getting is they need English and maths to get into the inclusive. So we're improving in English, we're improving in maths, and we don't seem to be improving as fast, getting both of them.
Joe, I think that's a really apt observation. Clearly, to get your level 2 plus indicators, as you say, Councillor, it's 5 good A-star to C GCSEs, including English or Welsh and maths. And the logic, I think, is quite sound to say that if you can get 5 GCSEs, including English or maths, well, why can't you get both? If you're capable of So, in all of our schools, and I know this is the case, and we've sat with all of our schools and looked at this in some detail, and some of your own governing bodies and schools, so you know this yourself, you'll see the pictures of the children in the head teacher's room, in the curriculum leads room, in the assessment leads room, looking at their performance on a regular sort of basis throughout the term, not at the end of the year. Are they going to get both? Real focus on trying to make sure that everyone gets both English and maths and 3 others as a minimum. Clearly that's a minimum that we're aiming for. And we still have some distance to go, and that's really your question. Your point, I think, is that there have been too many pupils this year again that weren't expected. We're talking about relatively small numbers now, I should add as well. So we're getting down to the few dozen now, as opposed to hundreds that might have been the case 4 or 5 years ago. But there are still too many pupils who aren't getting both, and actually, sometimes by a few marks or whatever. So one of the things we're working with schools on at the moment is looking at, well, exactly how did that happen? What do we learn for next year? Because I hate the phrase "easy wins," but those are some of the kids that we really just shouldn't be. If there are simple things we can do to make sure it doesn't happen, we should make sure we absolutely are secure on those youngsters. That won't sustain the trajectory that we want to be on there, because I think we are getting closer and closer now to the point where actually schools know their craft. They're really doing the very best they can for those for that group who might be at risk. And actually, we now need to push very hard down Key Stage 3 and into primary to make sure that we're tracking those youngsters early on, going right back to preschool, as I've said earlier, about tracking people who might be at risk. But yeah, it's still too many youngsters who really should have got both GCSEs. And there's a variable picture in schools, but we are talking relatively small numbers now of young people.
Can I bring Ron in? Sorry.
Thanks. Hello, Dermot. Sorry, good to see you. It's a similar point. It isn't just getting maths and English or Welsh. One of the things that came up at our school, and as you know, I'm a governor at Abersucken, was the measure is 5 A to Cs, including English and maths, English or Welsh and maths. It can be risky to take your eye off the other 3, whatever they may be. And departments do have slips in years, and you do get children who get English and maths, but not 5. So that's one issue I wanted to raise that we've got to keep a close eye on. The other one is your comments earlier about the early stages. I know we expected Key Stage 2 to go down because of a more rigorous assessment system, but I continue to worry, and I say this at school all the time, and I think I've said it here, that we're focusing year on year on salami slicing. Can we do the best we possibly can with English and or Welsh and maths and the 5A to C? There is a penalty in that. Partly you can skip the other 3 or damage the other 3, but also you're spending a lot of time in years 7 and 8 doing catch-up. And until, I know we've got Donaldson coming and we're not slicing in the same way, but actually for me to get to A to C effectively and sustainably will mean that we've got to look at this in a much more holistic way. I know individual schools are doing it and working with their feeder schools, but I actually think even where it's working reasonably well, we could do with a much more strategic, guided approach, because it's only that way we're going to end up having sane teachers and sustainable results. Because, you know, throwing everything at this year on year with a new cohort just isn't actually that reassuring. That's all I wanted to say.
We're talking the same language, I think, really, in terms of looking at the value added over time that schools add to children's learning. That has to be the discussion we now have with schools in a much more focused way than we've had previously. So we have devised some data tools for schools that we'll be sharing with them at this conference that I mentioned earlier. And really the focus has to be about, if you're in a primary school, it's not just the Year 6 teacher's responsibility. Yeah. You think about literacy and numeracy, and I know most teachers go, of course it's not, and that's absolutely the case. But we need to make sure that we, in Torvine, whatever else is happening in national government, because this isn't something that's being led on necessarily from Cardiff in terms of direction from central government or through the consortia arrangements of the national model. But we do need to think about, well, how are we tracking performance? How are we measuring that value added? As a parent, I should know where my child comes in at foundation phase, and at the end of year, well, every year, but at the end of year 2, well, what's happened? How far forward are they? You know, we would expect, and one of the things I want to share with schools and explore is, well, what is our expectation of progress for the typical child? No such thing, I know, but on average, typically, what should we expect to see in terms of progression every year? So that when you do that baseline assessment at foundation phase or in year 7, well, you know that child should get 5 A stars to C. So if there's any variation from that trajectory, how do we intervene? What's going to be different? As opposed to leaving that really to someone else maybe later on. I know, and I'm characterising here and I'm being unfair, the vast majority of teachers, that's exactly what they do. But we, I think, need to, as head teachers, governors, and the local authority, make explicit those expectations for with parents, not for them, with parents about this is what we would expect to see in Torvine schools. Now, if we were at the other side of the border, central government does that, and then some for you, and that's how you get measured in terms of the inspectorate. That's not the same regime here, so clearly we need to work with our schools and governing bodies to say, well, do we all share that view? Is that something that we really do want to hold ourselves to account on and be, and stand by? And that's very much the focus, I think, of this next year, about clarifying those expectations of progression and then measuring and finding a way to do that, because obviously we haven't got some of the same tools that they have in England. But I think that's very much where we need to get to. Otherwise, we're always playing catch-up, and that isn't sustainable. And, just have to bring the budget in here at some point. Going forward, it's unlikely that the budget that schools have at the moment is going to be the same level of budget going forward. So we have to be really prudent with the resources we have and not make assumptions about the continuation of pupil deprivation grant, PDG funding. Other types of funding we've seen in-year cuts. I suspect we'll see a tight budget round in terms of grant allocations for the Education Improvement Grant going forward. So we have to make sure that what we're doing is absolutely impactful. That's everybody's responsibility. So having those expectations clarified, I think, is critical over this next term.
Well, really, we're all, I think, thinking and saying the same thing. I just never, ever want that shock again. And that's what we need to do. We should be far more aware of what is going on, and then it won't happen.
Can I say that? The one thing I didn't tend to notice in this document at all, really, was the changes that are coming to what's in and what's out of the system. And I'm thinking particularly with reference to BTEC, because that has dramatically improved our science results, and yet from next year BTEC won't be judged on. And it's not the only thing, and there doesn't seem to be anything in here that indicates what we're doing to mitigate those changes.
There are some curriculum changes. BTEC's one, obviously. The other change is going to be the way that the English GCSE is kind of, at the moment, if you do English GCSE literacy, that counts towards your 5A starts to see inclusive as well. Clearly that's going to drop out soon. So I suppose the self-evaluation document is looking at how we've got to where we are at the moment, and really focusing on that recovery journey and that progress. In terms of looking at where we're going in terms of preparedness, for BTEC, the change within science and within English and elsewhere, in terms of Welsh Bac, for example, that's really contained within the documents that we have with the EAS. So they're referenced in the, I think you'll find them in the evidence column, which isn't complete yet, because this was a draft. And that there is actually a couple of documents looking at how we're supporting schools, getting ready for those changes. So you're right, it's not here at the moment, but it is actually in the final SER.
Ask why there seems to be huge parts of the evidence that's missing, but it's obviously
simply because of the timing for the committee. We set ourselves a target of getting everything finished, because there's obviously quite an extensive range of evidence that needs to go in time for the end of September. So we're literally finishing it this week before our next recovery board, which is on the 8th of October, and colleagues from the recovery board will have another opportunity to take us through it then as well.
The questions? Did you wish to carry on, Dermot?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. So in terms of recommendation 2, in terms of NEETs, clearly we've made substantial progress over time in terms of our NEETs performance. So I should say the self-evaluation document, of course, doesn't map onto the recommendations because it's written in line with the Common Inspection Framework, which is what Eston will use when they come to look at our performance. But as members will know, if I can find the right document, our performance in NEETs is now substantially improved from where we were in terms of the original visit, and we are now in the top quartile. I still think, given this year's performance, we're still in the top quartile in Wales in terms of NEET, in NEETs. Some of the key changes that have happened there relate to the way that we, in the way that we've actually organised ourselves and made sure that we know every single one of our learners. There are now, I think, no unknown NEETs in Torvine. So we have a tracking system in place early on that goes right down to primary, that looks at children who might potentially run the risk of becoming NEET because of exclusions, because of disaffection, because of other issues in their learning. And we track those pupils forward. We have a very clear system in place through Karen Padfield and her team of making sure we're talking to schools about how we can intervene before those pupils become at risk of NEET, and a very close relationship with Careers Wales and other partners as well, so that even after youngsters leave school, we know where they are, we reach out to them, we talk them through their options. That's clearly had a significant impact in reducing the numbers of pupils who are now non-employment education or training. Sustainability of that, again, we've gone from a position of many dozens down to, I think it's about 28, 29 pupils now who are potentially at risk of NEET. And it's unlikely, I suspect, that we'll get that number much lower. So I think we're probably at the population now that regrettably, no matter what we do and what resources we have access to, that we're probably going to be working with to try and make sure that we get them redirected and back into a meaningful education, employment or training opportunity. And we believe that that's now sustainable given the grant funding that has continued, the additional funding that Council itself has put in to make sure that work can continue. So we're well placed. Eston themselves, of course, when they came to see NEETs as one of the focus of a previous monitoring visit, said that they felt at that point we'd largely addressed the issue, and we think we've made further consolidation since then. So we're quite confident of where we are in NEETs at the moment.
When it comes to NEETs, of course, the big challenge, which is, as you said, there's still that nagging doubt and the feeling in the back of your mind that so many of the things that we are doing with young people who fall into that category is funded from various grants and so forth, particularly European funding. And the concern is, will that still be there? Will that be there in the future? And how do we work on and how do we maybe address how when it won't be there, and particularly addressing it in schools about how they can help those young people there?
I think the last point you raised there is really critical. Everything that we've done, I think, over the last 2 or 3 years has been really about helping schools to understand the roles and responsibilities that they have. That's not just about council services or someone else or the parents or whoever to do something. It's actually a shared responsibility, and this is where your part of that equation sits. So I think we've made really strong, I think schools have made really bold moves. All of our secondary schools now have their own provision map in place to deal with children who present with difficulty, who are at risk of disaffection, in a way that's completely different from 3 years ago. And each of our secondary schools has got a slightly different version of that because it fits their own community. But they really have invested, and they've invested their own resources into getting those different provisions in place. So again, I'd like to say well done to the schools. I think they've done a really great job in that and are working with partners. The sustainability issue is an issue for every service we have, be it grant funded or core funded in a world where we've got potentially shrinking budgets. So clearly there's an issue for council in terms of prioritisation of what we want to do together holistically. From the education service viewpoint and from communities and the other services involved, clearly we want to be as efficient as possible in making sure that A, we only do things once, that schools have clarity about process, and that we cut back any excess we have, and that's something that we look at continuously, and we'll be looking at again this year in terms of how we can be efficient. But I think it's the reality of where we're going, that some of the services that we currently offer will always be maintained either by grant or, as time goes on, we'll have to go back and revisit with partners actually who is responsible for some of those activities, and there's a finite limit to that clearly because schools have got the budget they've got. That is going to change, and that will be something that we need to continuously come back and look at, and that's why the self-evaluation is at least an annual process, and we look at ours on a termly basis to make sure that we're mindful of those pressures.
Just come in, saying about that, it was a point which you've made a number of times in this report, about alignment, which I think was the thing you alluded to there, the alignment of services, and particularly with regards to families first, communities first, and Flying Start.
Yeah, so an example of that, and it goes back, albeit to early years, one of the changes we've made within education this year is realised that I don't know why it took us this year to realise it, because it seems so sensible once you say it out loud, but actually we've got teams across this organisation as a corporate body, who we might have 2 or 3 teams visiting the same family on the same day, probably for most of the same reason, maybe with a slightly different label to it, but actually because we're compartmentalised, we're not getting the benefit. It's confusing for the family. It's substitutionalist in the sense that we can't be really focusing our effort on getting the best solution for the family, and it's wasteful. So one of the changes we're making within education is to bring all of our early years leads together with families first, together with our colleagues for psychology and educational welfare and so on, to look at youngsters coming through into primary, to make sure not just about what their assessment of need is, but that's an important gain in itself, but also to coordinate that work so that it isn't just families first together with the psychologist, together with the EWO, who are all visiting the family separately, and try and join up. That should get us a better outcome anyway, but equally it should also be a more efficient way of working. So some of the challenges to us as chief officers going forward will be, I think, to be much bolder in terms of how we look at some of the boundaries that currently exist. Probably, in terms of maybe breaking down some of those boundaries between service areas, to look at how we can be much more customer focused, and in the education vernacular at the moment, person-centred, in terms of looking at what that individual family or child need, and then rearranging services around them. Again, something that's been in place in England for many years, and there's lots of lessons to be learned there from the way that organisations have changed over the last 5 years in England in particular. And that's where we will need to go. That's the way we'll get some of the efficiencies out of the provision that we currently have. But clearly that will come with its own challenges as well.
So Karen, did you wish to go in?
Yeah, just to say really that I notice on page 52, and we've sort of back to this needs, because this is about is reducing the number of pupils leaving school that will recognise qualification. But my feeling that this is that this will impact greatly on NEETs. And when you look at it, it's 50 volunteering opportunities through Prevent, 300 basic skills by Prevent, 200 additional vocational qualifications, 200 plus young people volunteering on a play service. And I know that this sort of grant aid is diminishing quite rapidly, really. I'm just sort of wondering, should we prepare ourselves in future for looking at an increase in this needs level from 2.2?
What I would say is, and it comes back to Councillor Cameron's point earlier, it's our responsibility as officers to make sure you don't get that shock. It's our responsibility as officers, whoever's got the type of responsibility, is to come to you and say, before that happens, this is where we are going. Now, at the moment, I'm comfortable from talking to colleagues who've got the right responsibility for this area, that we've got the right resources and the right people in place and the right structures in place, and that we're not heading for that position. I think we'll stick at roughly the percentage of needs that we currently have. And that's something that's really dependent on how we work with schools, maintaining that relationship, and obviously all the structures around it, and with other partners. But we will need to come to you, and I think our systems are sophisticated enough for us to be able to say, we think there's going to be a crunch point here, so that members then can make timely decisions about, well, what choices should we make? It's always going to be a difficult area, and can be potentially quite expensive, to put it mildly. But I think we're managing, as with all risks, the point is you can never get rid of it. You can simply manage it and try and put in the right control measures to make sure that those young people get what they need, and that we can deliver that in a sustainable way, or at least in a manageable way. And I think we've got those information systems in place now to be able to be confident that we can bring those concerns to members through our own performance management systems in a timely manner for us to intervene and manage it properly together.
Yeah, it's on a similar point, but it's about joining up our thinking and being more effective, more efficient as resources become more difficult to get. And that is, very often actions in one area have an impact on the outcome in another. And I notice that one of the things that we're still concerned about is the level of exclusions in primary schools. Now, to my mind, there's potentially a direct link between the underlying causes of those exclusions and the potential for those particular children to be NEETs in years to come. And that, again, as with the programmes that we're currently hitting the current NEETs children with, should we actually be using some of these earlier markers to have a more coordinated time plan for dealing with children who will end up disaffected? That's all.
In a word, we're already doing. So the NEETs indicator includes a component for exclusions and attendance. So if you're excluded, you are more likely to then... And it's an I'm not going to get into the philosophical debate about how you get excluded, because clearly some children, it may be to do with it within child factors, within family factors, but it's also the case, and I'd be dishonest not to mention this, that 3 or 4 of our schools account for the vast majority of all exclusions. So this is, in fact, one school last year was responsible for nearly 50% of all primary exclusions. So it's not also so simple and linear to say that an exclusion necessarily puts you at risk. There's clearly other issues that we as a service, together with those schools and government bodies, need to look at there. But yeah, we already do build that in. For whatever the reason, however you get excluded, if you get excluded, that is really not good for your long-term outcomes, which is why any exclusion is not in a child's interests in the vast majority of cases. While we have to accept children do behave sometimes in ways that justifiably result in exclusion, that's something that we want to plan to avoid, give schools alternative strategies to look at. That's why we've got a specialist senior psychologist for behaviour, why we do lots of training on attachment, why we do lots of training on behaviour management, etc. And we reinvigorated all of our work around behaviour. We have seen a 50% reduction, as you know, Ron, in days lost to exclusion in secondary schools. That's come about because each of the secondary schools, again, albeit with our support, but it was the secondary schools that did it, put a plan in place, looked at their own needs, measured where the pinch points were, saw where children were getting difficulty, and then put a metered response in place. That's what we'll be doing with primary schools who are in the same position.
Next recommendation. Yeah, please.
So in
Recommendation 3.
Recommendation 3 in terms of self-evaluation. If I can be so bold, I'll try and include recommendation 3 and 4 together in terms of performance management as well. A theme that's come through in our discussions in the past has been around how do we make sure we know ourselves well enough, and how do we... I'm smiling now because I can anticipate the discussion we're about to have. And how do we make sure we hold our prime provider for school improvement, the Education Achievement Service, have I anticipated correctly, I wonder, how we hold the EAS to account. So I'll start there, and so we'll look at that in terms of how we know ourselves around that provider, but I'll move on in terms of performance management into some of the changes that we've brought into place in the Education Service. And obviously this committee itself is also obviously very heavily involved in looking at performance management of schools in your own subcommittee, so I won't labour that too much. So in terms of the Education Achievement Service, it's been an interesting journey that we've been on together. And one I have to say, which I think is genuinely improving year on year. I think we need to face up to the fact that we're improving. Well, we are. So we have to bear in mind that performance in our schools has improved over the same time that the ES has been in existence. That doesn't necessarily, I know, mean a causal relationship, but it is a heck of a coincidence nonetheless. I think they are related. Of course they are. Our school improvement services before the ES came along were not fit for purpose. That's why we were in special measures, because you didn't know, the service didn't know where schools were performing. It wasn't good enough. We're sat here today, I think now, with a range of measures and information available that we didn't have before. So I'll just talk about some of the process changes around the EAS and then how we're quality assuring that to make sure it's fit for purpose. So we now have termly reports from the EAS on where schools think each of their pupils is at in terms of progress towards targets. We have a much more accurate, but not yet perfect, if you can get to that point, but not yet good enough then perhaps, target setting process that was much improved last year, where schools much more accurately assessed where they thought their pupils would come. Our secondary schools were within 3.5% of getting that right. So again, you're talking about relatively small numbers of pupils. So accurate, but we've picked up on that point before about English, not maths, or both. So we know we have some improvement to do, but that is much improved. So we can have some confidence there that all of our schools are much more able to really gauge where their own pupils are at. In terms of where the EAS are giving information to us, I think now we have a range of information that before we had to provide ourselves, and we were criticised for, I think back in the original inspection, about replicating the Commission with the EAS. So their own business intelligence now is much more developed. Further work to be done clearly around the use of PDG and value for money that we're getting from some of the grants, and that's something that we're talking to the EAS about. But the craft that the EAS have now in terms of the way that they have, the way that Challenge Advisors work, further refinement this year, looking really to try and get at, build on some of the work that was done from Schools Challenge Cymru, and look at that methodology for really helping schools focus in on a small number of issues if they're in red or amber, for example. So building on the Accelerated Improvement Board that some of you might have experience of if you're coming in a Schools Challenge Cymru school. We've built that into the model this year. And also, I should say, of course, the Principal Challenge Advisor role, something that we piloted in essence, when we asked, we commissioned the ES to have our own challenge advisor, and you might remember Chris Harries coming to this committee some years ago. And we were paying over and above for that, quite a lot of resource, and actually the ES saw that as a model that they thought was really useful, and they built it into the core. So we were then able to employ Sharon Davis as our own Head of School Improvement, Head of Learning, and then use her role to really keep the ES to account. So we've seen loads of change with the ES. There's no two ways about it. It's not the same organisation it was at the beginning. I think there's better scrutiny now of the ES in terms of political oversight. JEG's now back in operation. So Richard Clark's our representative on the board. There will be a new governance paper coming out imminently because the governance arrangements aren't quite finalised yet. But that legal advice is now in, I'm delighted to say, and I think JEG had a paper last Friday, and that will be coming out to the board, to the ES board shortly. And we are seeing the impact. We know we have more work to do. We're not seeing enough yet, clearly around what's happening in classrooms, around the quality of teaching, and particularly around literacy and numeracy outcomes that we've mentioned already. And we are talking to the EAS, in fact, in the last week about how that's going to change this year and what we want to see differently. So I think we're getting a much more responsive, we have a much more responsive partner. But the point being, we know ourselves, we know where our difficulties are. The ES have supported us in working with governors and with the schools to tackle the issue around teacher assessment. I think that would have been much more difficult if we had to try to do that by ourselves. So I think we're well placed now to make progress going forward from the position we're in. In terms of how we hold the ES to account, as I say, the governance arrangements are nearly complete, but the board is in place, JEG's in place. The audit committee, which is a sort of scrutiny function across the 5 authorities, will be clarified shortly, and that paper we'll share with all members as soon as we have that, once that's finalised. Clearly, we also, in Sharon Davis's role, have someone whose job it is to look at the impact of what happens from the EAS. I think over years 1 and 2, there's a lot of process discussion about we have visited so many schools so often. We've been in, we've done this work, we've done that work. And, Eston's question is, so what? So I think we've moved well beyond what we've been in and we've done to we've been in, and we've had this discussion, and this is now the difference. And I think our schools, have really seen that difference over the last year. And one example of that, without naming the school in particular, was through the national categorisation, for example, where last year, obviously look at standards, then look at capacity for change, future prospects. The school came out at amber. Now, working with the EAS, the information that we had as a local authority, and the information the EAS had, we agreed actually that wasn't an accurate description of where that school was, so we agreed we'd change it, and we put the school down to red, and then we triggered an intervention process with that school. I think that wouldn't have happened 2 or 3 years ago, because we just didn't know, we didn't have the confidence, maybe. We certainly didn't have the information that we needed as an authority, whereas now that's a very, I wouldn't say comfortable, because it's not nice having to do that, but it's It's a very matter-of-fact process for us now, where that is embedded in our discussions. And, I should hasten to add, we were able to intervene very quickly and support that school to come out of red they'll be coming out at this categorisation, so within a year they're out. So in terms of self-eval EAS, that's where we are. I think we've got a much more richer picture, a much clearer and fairer understanding. In terms of performance management within the education service in particular, it just was not fit for purpose. Work Smarts, as you know from the staff survey, and if you look at the responses from that across the organisation, people either don't know what a Work Smart is sometimes, they say they haven't had one, or it's not a regular part of their day-to-day world. I can confidently report to you that within the education service, everybody was involved in the formulation of the team plan and the service plan. How do I know that? A, I was with them when we did it, was part of it. But B, we've got a process in place with dates set throughout the year. Every team has its own performance review. They do that internally, and then they have a performance review with me. So every officer who's got a named action in the service plan in education will be sat with the chief officer and their line manager with their team discussing where they're at least 3 times a year, as well as the process within the team and their own individual Work Smart. And everyone in education has had a Work Smart this year. Everyone. Now, those processes can appear to be oppressive to the uninitiated, but clearly the way we try to do that is it's a problem-solving session. One of the things we were very clear with schools when we talked about teacher assessment, for example, is we're not here to catch people out. We're here to get better. So the philosophy very much is about how do we become solution-focused. If you're stuck with your named responsibility, how do I help you get those barriers to you making progress removed? What do we do together to try and shift it? So the culture we've tried to set within education is very much about we're here to help each other. There's not a lot of us about, and clear accountability and tracking of performance throughout the year. And I know that's something then in terms of the corporate assessment and corporate self-evaluation process that we've seen replicated across the organisation, and I know that's developing elsewhere as well. So, Chair, if that's okay, that's 3 and 4 hopefully covered.
Thank you. It's just more of the same, really. It's much better to do something small early than let it be sort of covered up in a way, and it'll develop into something really big by the time they get to comp.
It seems to me that the way forward really is what we're doing at the moment has made a significant improvement. That improvement is usually around that 14, 15 age group to get them over the hump of the Key Stage 4s. But it strikes me that if we are to improve going forward, the way to do that is by improving the quality of teaching and learning within the schools. What worries me about this is this issue now around school improvement. I mean, I understand that, basically is what we brought EAS in to do. Their role in school improvement is slightly moving backwards in a sense, which is why we brought in a school improvement officer. But school improvement is only going to be about getting the better schools to show the worst performing schools how to perform, if you like. But what worries me about that is that we need a buy-in from the governing bodies, because they employ the head teacher, they employ the teachers. They want those teachers to be in their schools teaching their pupils and getting their results up. How do you think, it doesn't really explain how that process is going to go moving forward.
Thank you. I don't accept the point you make that the EAS is, we're slightly moving backwards. That's why we appointed a head of learning, or head of school improvement. I'm really pleased that we have, don't get me wrong, I'm very pleased that we've appointed head of learning. I think that adds a richness to our capacity and also gives us confidence that we know we're getting the product that we've asked for from the EAS. But I don't think that was a result of moving backwards. I think that was just an iteration of where we were at the time, looking at the best way to get the best value from the EAS. The point you make that was really well made again about school-to-school work and about how do we make sure moving forward, what we don't want to see is a massive explosion of school improvement professionals being employed in central services. And there's lots of models in the past for that. Now, to be fair to the EAS, our contribution to the EAS has gone down every year. So we're paying less year on year as the size of the EAS itself contracts. And that's certainly, to be fair to Steve Davis, the Managing Director of the EAS, something that he was very upfront about at the very beginning. Our model, come back to Robert Hill report, has to be about self-improving systems in schools, actually taking the lead in terms of school improvement, again a theme that we've raised with schools. So there is always that balancing act as schools, head teachers, other key staff develop their skill set. Teachers generally want to share what they've got, really want to help other schools as well, which is clearly what lots of our schools already do. We've got very strong and improving cluster arrangements in Torvine, where primaries and secondaries are starting to work together. Other, we call them trios of schools, where we've structured some work that's coming together, and lots of other schools just getting on with the business of you're stuck, I'm going to come and help you. Clearly there's always that tension then about how do I maintain the quality and standards back at base. And I think that's the strategic role of the local authority, together with the EAS, to make sure that we're not spreading that expertise too thin. And where schools in particular difficulty, our systems are sensitive enough to know that we know you need more than actually you can be provided by your peers within your system. Increasingly, that's where I think the school improvement service is going to go. How do we broker that support, and how do we make sure that you're not exposed to excess risk? And that is not straightforward. We have schools this year in Torvine, if you look at the national test outcomes in terms of literacy and numeracy, who have been supporting work with the EAS, whose performance in those tests is significantly lower than last year. So it's a really important point you raise, and that's something that, again, as part of our discussion with EAS, we're really sensitised to. How do we make sure that all those plates remain spinning while you still deliver the quality product and support your peers? It's not an easy, straightforward answer to that. It won't come about by simply putting in more challenge advisors. It comes about us knowing where our schools are and having very frank discussions with governing bodies about where they know they're performing, what their risks are, and sharing those risks and, again, managing those risks together.
Thanks, Chair. I'm pleased you put the two topics together because they are the same, different sides of the same coin, really. First of all, I'm going to surprise you, Dermot. I am going to agree we're in a much better place than we were before. But I still have concerns, and I'd look forward to the new governance arrangements, because governance doesn't exist just as a theoretical topic. It's there to make sure you're getting what you want to get. Now, we've got a complex situation, really, with EAS and schools. It's not hands-off contractor. You don't say, go away and give me a better school and I'll come back and look at it when you've finished. So we've got a number of things. One, and I'm going to use the word inclusive. I know it's fashionable, but because there are so many players and stakeholders in this, and it's the point that was being made earlier, school, an individual school is a stakeholder in the whole system, not just an island. We need to be sure we've got inclusive planning of what we're doing, and I'm really pleased to hear that the teams are now talking about what they're doing within the authority, because I've always found that if you include the people on the ground in your planning process, you get a better plan. Bosses don't invent plans in their heads. They like to think they do, but that's not the way it works. So inclusive planning, but also, and that involves governors too. Governors have a role to play, especially when the Welsh Government is actually holding them more to account for what's in the plan and how it's delivered. Then they need to be in there somewhere. But within the I'll use the word governance. Within the governance, we've got the stream that's standard company law stuff. You know, how do the owners make sure the executives are doing the right job? That's one stream. And in a way, although I'd like to see some external involvement in that, it might not be essential. But more importantly is how do we ensure that each of us, be they school governors or councillors who aren't the executive member, because, you know, the executive member by definition more hands-on than the others, how do we ensure that all of us have a very clear progress and performance against targets regular report? Because that mechanism, whatever is coming out in the governance arrangements, really need to allow us to begin to make a causal link between the improvement, which is there, and the activities of the contractor who's meant to be giving us the improvements. And, you know, I don't see it there at the moment. It's there for some people, but it's not inclusive and it's not that public and open. And I'd like to see it more open as well.
A comment, yeah. Dermot, did you?
Well, fair comment. The answer is yeah. I mean, I think there's more we can do. There always will be. What I would say, though, we do have timely reporting of progress now towards targets. That is shared through the Children and Young People's Improvement Partnership Board. It can come to this group at any point that you want it to. So it is there in terms of that multi-agency partnership. You know, we have agreed with schools that we'll share data. So the local authority, we now publish everybody's data to everybody. So we do look at, you know, teacher assessment, national test outcomes together, for example, as well. And the EAS, I think, have really taken on board that piece of work that we set the pace with last year. I've just published a comparison of where our schools are and some analysis of teacher assessment against reading test, numeracy test this year, which we'll be sharing with schools as well. So I think the accountability in terms of progress towards is now more meaningful than it was before. If you look at the last business case, one of the things that we had put in there, and we put it in previous iterations that have come through here of the partnership agreement, the post-inspection action plan, of the number of schools who were getting ESTIN, who were coming through ESTIN and having good or excellent, which obviously is really important, but not necessarily that meaningful. For what the level of detail I think that you're hinting at is, we also put in things like the number of schools who were characterised as green or yellow, which again is important because it's sort of based on standards, it's based on prospects, but it's not the level of detail again. And that those sort of labels can hide a multitude of other stories. So I think we are getting better. We're always happy to listen to members and to any member of the community about, well, how do we improve that reach of that information so parents can make informed decisions and governors too. However, governors, of course, should already have that information available. So another part of this equation isn't just what's published. It's about the training for governors, the training for members that we put on. How do we make sure that everybody, as part of your day-to-day role in school, automatically uses that information that's already available? So I think it is getting better. I'm glad to hear, you know, you recognise that too. Are we there yet? Probably not. I think we have a bit more to do. But the real focus of our discussions around the ES moving forward has to be on, is it good enough? Is this good enough for our children? The level of outcomes for our kids in our schools, is that sufficient? And what we've said in this sample val overall, of course, is that it's just adequate. Well, that's not good enough. So clearly that has to be the starting point of any discussion around performance in terms of the ES and the education service as well, going forward.
Nigel, sorry.
Yes, Chair. In your report on page 75, you actually come out directly and say, tracking systems used in some schools hinder the effective use of information, which is pretty strong, which is a pretty strong thing to say. Could you expand on that and say which information doesn't help governors and all the other stakeholders which how is the information hindering, and which information is hindering?
I would love to be able to comment on that, and I'm desperately trying to find the point you're referring to. Yeah.
Is it the tracking?
It's whether they have a tracking system
Yeah.
in some schools.
Yeah.
Sure, I missed that completely. In terms of, yeah, I mean, there isn't a common model of tracking in Wales. There isn't one in the consortium. So there is variation between schools and sometimes within schools about the way that they track. I think we've said, I said earlier, and we've said in the report, we know that there's been significant progress because the gap between where we said we were going to be in terms of target setting and then where pupils are is much, much narrower than it was before. But clearly that's not universally the case. So in a small number of schools, we're working with them to make sure that the tracking systems they have in place really are meaningful, are joined up and are fit for purpose. I think that's what we were saying there in that point.
Would you say that's is in the school, is that an administrative matter, or would you say that it's a policy matter, or is it or is it maybe suspicion that that awful suspicion that of feeling being misled on these matters?
Well, I wouldn't want to comment on the last point because clearly, if there was any improper conduct, then we would take the appropriate steps to deal with that. And that would be a very serious misconduct issue. I think more often than not, where things aren't working well, it's and again, it's a thing we haven't really touched on today, but the consistency of application and understanding between teachers sometimes about what makes a level 3 a level 3 in terms of moderation, in terms of that standardisation of expectation of that's what good looks like, or what a level looks like, is part of the issue. So more often than not, it's actually about how do we support that school to embed undoubtedly good practice they have in some components of the school and see that evenly spread and shared across the whole system. So I think it's more to do with that. And we clearly know we've got an issue. ES have just won a contract with the Welsh Government to look at improving moderation across Wales. So there's a major piece of work going on this year to look at how we can really start to get some traction on the whole issue of moderation, because it's Welsh Government at last, I think, is the right way of saying it, have recognised that there's inconsistency across the whole of Wales. So I think that's probably where that is based. But if we were to find something that was inappropriate, then clearly we've no hesitation in robustly dealing with that.
Sorry?
Yeah, I don't think it's really sort of inappropriate, but nobody likes giving bad news and nobody likes hearing bad news. And I think perhaps the governors need the EAS to come in and actually give them the information, because having been a governor for a long time, it's very difficult when the head tells you something. You have to accept it because you really haven't got, or a lot of governors haven't got the knowledge to know that what they're being told, and it's not till you can show it perhaps to somebody else and they can say to you, well, that's not possible. But you can't sort of contradict or say anything. Well, that's how I found it. As I say, it was a while ago. Even going to training courses. I don't think if you've got a background in education or in teaching, without help, you can't necessarily question a professional.
And to change the answer to that's part of the reason. You're right, and that's a tough call. And you know, the jargon contained in here, and we have, I promise, tried to cut it down. Is phenomenal.
Just that
yeah. But clearly that's part of the reason why Welsh Government brought in mandatory training for governors. Part of that training is around the use of data. What we'd say to all governors is to the 12 of you who haven't signed up, if you're watching the webcast, can you please make sure that you do soon, otherwise you'll lose your right to be a governor. And we have written to you. But also, if you're a governor or anyone who feels they want more training, we will regularly go back, revisit, and we put on top-up training at any point. Because you're right, it's not straightforward. But that's part of the challenge I think that governors have the right to make to their own head teachers. And the ES do join in those the reports to governing bodies to make sure that there's no confusion or any mistakes in the message given sometimes. That message should be clear. You as a governor shouldn't have to know all the jargon and know all the minutiae of how that number came about. You have every right to expect to know that is where it should be, this is how much distance we have from where we're supposed to be, and this is what we're going to do about it. If you're not, then that's not a good report to the governing body. And that's something that governors quite rightly then should be saying, well, hang on, can we have more clarity?
Yeah, just obviously as a relatively new governor and as a relatively new member of the committee, just from a reporting point of view, I find an awful lot of the various different abbreviations to be a bit of an issue. So just from a reporting point of view, something I would ask if, or make a recommendation if possible, that we could have some sort of glossary which says, oh, well, this means, I know what an ECG is, because obviously I've had dealings with heart issues. So, but an awful lot of this stuff, is, you might as well be speaking German as far as I'm concerned. And then on top of that, obviously the other issue I had was something that I've mentioned obviously a couple of times, various different situations, that where we're talking about percentages, is it possible to have a situation where we're talking about the actual volume of children we're talking about? How many children? You've got it. You've alluded to it. You've commented on it yourself. But how many children are we actually talking about? If it's, we know, for instance, that there's X number of children in each row of each year. What percentage? Okay, yes, we know that 56% of those children achieve this. Okay, well, how many kids is that? How many kids don't get that? And just making it human beings rather than just a percentage point. If we're saying, okay, well, hang on, we're 0.25% down, well, actually that's 2 more children, or that's 15 more children. Because obviously if it's 2 children, it's one issue. If it's 15, it's a much bigger issue.
That we need the percentages, obviously, for reporting to WAG, but I think it would be useful for members if we could bother you to have that extra information.
Joe, we'll endeavour to do that, and clearly in member seminars when we present information, which would be the main vehicle to get information over to most members. This is obviously a technical report written directly for Estin.
Exactly.
Exactly. So it has to be written in a particular format. But you're right, what you're asking for is an appendix to that, saying put that in context. So we'll endeavour to do it. It's tricky for a report like this, but when we do member seminars or give information in general, we'll always try and contextualise that, and I think that's a fair point.
So, Chair, and that's exactly what I was going to say. It all depends on the report. Obviously, this is going to the Welsh Government and the Estin, and they require the percentages. That's it.
Okay, can I have Councillor Karen and then...
Yeah, a bit of a one out of left field, really. I would point out, by the way, I'm one of those 12 that you referred to earlier. But I'm dated up to here because I'm on the Schools Monitoring Subcommittee, so that's why I've not gone. It's on page 28. It's this partnership working issue, 6.6, and it's actually in the report rather than in your self-evaluation. But it struck me as a bit peculiar. Health and well-being remain a challenge. Despite the health and well-being status for children and young people being broadly in line with the All Wales average, partners within the LSB executive consider that well-being, and in particular mental and emotional well-being, requires more concerted action. Now, in itself, I've got no objection to the statement. What surprises me is that there is no justification behind it. We are on the average, and I appreciate that we want to be above the average, but given that this is like the LSB is a partnership body of us and other authorities, and you get the sneaking suspicion looking at that statement is that Torfaen is on or about the average and other authorities aren't, and we've been pushed by the LSB to concentrate on something that other authorities need to concentrate on more than we do.
I'll bring you back to the statement. The Estin speak for where we are is adequate. And no one's aspiration can be adequate anymore. So I'm going to throw that challenge back to you, obviously, and say, well, look, you know, I don't really care in some ways where everyone else is. Our focus has to be about what's going to happen for our pupils, and I know everyone here agrees with that. So we have to have the highest aspirations for our children and young people. On the LSP, you've obviously got statutory partners of health included there, along with the police, along with the fire service, along with social care, third sector, and other partners as well from a variety of agencies. There is an issue for, you know, and this has come up in a host of different arena around support for emotional well-being, support for child and adolescent mental health services and access to specialist services for people experiencing mental health difficulties. I think there's a feeling that while we're making some progress, we recognise that it's just okay. I think that's what it comes back to. We're just about adequate at the moment, but we know there's a lot more we can do. So obviously one of the ways that, you know, one of the things we've done in-house this year is put together a bid as part of the Spend to Save proposals that went to Council around putting in an extra recruiting a psychiatric nurse to work with education to support looked after children, to try and support those youngsters, for instance. Clearly, we've already got long-standing relationships with the third sector in terms of MIST, the Multi-Agency Intervention Support Team, for looked after children. But we recognise there are still gaps in provision that maybe you know, aren't going to be met elsewhere. So I think that was simply a recognition of it's okay, but you know, we want more than okay. And we want to have a real range of options for young people to be able to self-select and actually, you know, get the help that they need. You know, for instance, my youngster came back from school. She's at school at Wydene in Chepstow, which is in Gloucestershire, and came back with it was a little red book. That stuck out for me, and it was a little red book of mental health, and in that was a little directory. She's 13, she's 14 in November, of different phone numbers and agencies that she could contact if she had an issue around a range of concerns, so that she could seek out help and support without necessarily feeling, you know, she had to go through someone else. And we're not there at that point yet. And I think that was just the partnership saying, you know, there's more we can do here. I don't think it was a criticism. I think it was a recognition that actually it's okay, but that's not okay anymore. Okay is not good enough.
I was just surprised. I mean, I had no objection to it. I was just... given that it came from the LSP, I'm surprised that there wasn't a little bit more information given in that point to indicate why they felt that the more concerted action was needed. You know, because having said that we'd hit target, if you like, average, you know, it did strike me as a little, coming from an almost, I mean, I describe the LSP as an outside body, but, you know, it's almost an outside body. It's not something that directly, we don't get their reports, we don't know what they're doing, and as a consequence, it just surprised me that it was put in such a blunt way into the document.
Well, again, I need to just challenge that slightly in the sense that the LSP coordinates the work of all the services who are there. So I report into the LSP, as I report into you. So I report into the LSP tactical group, and they have a very, you know, it was one of the members of that group who said, it was an interesting comment he made, was that this was the first year, his children have grown up and moved on. He said, this is the first year in a long time I felt really anxious about the results. Because he was taking personal ownership of how our results were going to turn out this year. So I think that the LSP really have a very central and important role in helping coordinate services, make sure we're not replicating, and also identifying, as I think this is flagging up, there are gaps is too strong, but there are other things that we can do. And I think they do have a sense of ownership, and they have a really critical role, clearly, in coordinating services. And they also have, I suppose, to some extent, a scrutiny function, not the same way as this committee, but they really do hold partners to account. So the detail comes in key question 3, where it flags up there are other things that we can do there. And some of the evidence there isn't populated in this version, but will be in the final version. So again, if we want to have a more detailed discussion either in this meeting or separately, then I'm sure I can facilitate that and we could explore that in a bit more detail.
Ron, sorry.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be very brief because unfortunately Sean and I are going to have to go in a minute because we're closing the GAP meeting at Abersachen. But anyway, I wanted to go back to the previous topic, sorry. But I think it would improve the self-evaluation report if during the part that talks about the way forward in relation to the handling of information and data, because of course the figures and so on are needed, but the point I think that was being made around the table by a number of members was that it's not the data itself that helps the school understand what it needs to do. It's the interpretation and contextualizing of the data. And I think the training for us non-statisticians needs to focus on how data can inform decision making. You know, what is the right kind of way of looking at data? So that's just a suggestion on the way forward. The other one was the point that was made about improving teaching and learning. And there I think the dichotomy between EAS and the authority in terms of the career development and training of teachers may have an impact. I'm only saying may. And that is that traditional HR as an individual focused career development is part of the authority in the school. Looking at potential general trends of areas of improvement actually comes out of a comparison of a set of results. And so putting together what you might call, well, it would be training courses by any other name, of picking up deficiencies that are becoming general and are not individual, would probably help us improve teaching and learning. It's not just looking at individuals, it's looking at our systems themselves becoming slightly defective.
Very quickly, Chair, to add to that, the MySID system within the EAS is a way of, it tracks all sorts of information, but it also tracks the spend within grant, be it EIG, PDG or whatever, sorry, these different grant streams, and then looks at impact. So I think we've got the technology now, or we're nearly there, to look at, well, what do we get out of that spend? And so what courses did those people go on? What were the training opportunities that they had? So again, it comes back to, that didn't give us the outcome that we thought we were going to get. We should switch it off, and those are the types of events and process training that we need to actually encourage more to attend. So I think we're nearly there with that. Yeah.
Thank you. I realise that not everyone are statisticians and can follow statistics. However, most people, to include parents, fully understand league tables and where we are in a league. Thinking positively now, if you like, the fact, and I congratulate you and your team from when it comes to Key Stage from going to, from 16th, and we're now into position number 13, and Key Stage 3, we're now, I believe, is position number 11. To go along with what your report also indicated in regarding governors, head teachers and parents have got to be aspirational. And turning to you as Chief Officer now, if you like, when can you see us breaking through into the top 10 in regarding Key Stage
Next year.
4 and Key Stage 3?
Next year.
And that's great news. And then to continue then, when can you see us breaking or being number 1?
Impossible takes harder. No, that's some bad taste. Look, all joking aside, we're now on the cusp of 60% level 2 plus. We're within 3% of it. Something that I don't think we could have thought we would, where we would be 3 years ago. See about that. That would put us in the second quartile. We've been in the bottom quartile for every performance indicator since our beginning almost. So, recognising that schools and young people and their families have made huge efforts to get us to this point, we're going to keep asking for more, because that's what we want. We want to see further improvement. I really do anticipate within the next 2 years, in all likelihood, and we haven't completed the target setting process, so I'm a bit wary of saying, yeah, we'll definitely get it this year. But we should be, I expect to see further improvement again this year. I expect to see that improvement probably above the rate of improvement across the rest of Wales. I don't expect us to slide back. If we get to 60% this year, I'll be really pleased. But certainly within 2 years, we'll get to 60% level 2 plus. There's no reason why we shouldn't do. and we should be in the second quartile, i.e. over the halfway mark in the next year. Getting to first, given the conditions that we have, would be quite impressive if we get there. But that, all joking aside, is what we're going to aim to do.
Okay.
Sorry, with the fact that the funding, as you stated, is becoming less and less, obviously there's got to be further improvements then to the staff, if you like, and the way that the teachers do. I know you've explained that, but without the actual finances as well, I know that we're going down the 21st century schools, and for that. But is there a limit, do you think, that Torfaen can reach, if you like, in regarding the league table?
It's not a league table, to be fair, so I'll get picked up on that, and someone will pick me up on that outside afterwards with the league table. But in terms of the ranking overall in Wales, is there an ultimate? I don't know. When I find that limit, I'll tell you. What I would say is there's no relationship, or it's very hard to find a relationship between the amount of money spent and the outcome. I don't think there's necessarily. This isn't budget round yet, is it, Chair? I shouldn't be saying this, but. That relationship isn't straightforward or linear. So we have to get more creative with the resources we have, because the children are there, we have to get those outcomes, and whatever cards I'm dealt in terms of budget provision, we need to maintain that progress and get the best outcome. What it will mean is that things are going to look different, and there may be some pain involved in that, but we need to make sure we get the best possible deal for those youngsters.
Okay, are we ready to move on to sort of just a brief introduction to recommendation 5? So you wanted to say on that before we wind up?
Just to say that clearly there's been some significant change around the partnership arrangements from when Essendon were back with us. We had a couple of boards. There's now one board, the Children and Young People's Improvement Partnership Board. There is a clear partnership framework in place. There's significant work's been done around trying to map out roles, responsibilities, and a clear work programme for that board. I think that's achieved. We hope that the CYPB will in effect take over the role of the Recovery Board, but they'll really keep a close eye on, a bit more than that, but they'll have the remit for education very firmly in their view, and the board have been incredibly supportive. I made that comment about a colleague on the board who was saying, his anxiety levels were high this summer waiting for those results to come out. I think they really have taken ownership of where we are. They really do understand some of the concerns that we have in education, and have enabled us to join up with services elsewhere also. So simply to say that I think we've seen, again, strong progress with the Partnership Board, and arguably we've made the progress we've made with the support of that board throughout that journey as well.
Questions on that? If not, we'll move to round up recommendations. Okay, can I thank you very much for your 5-minute whiz through, Dermot? Very interesting. Thanks a lot. Okay, thanks. Bye. Are there any sort of comments that you wish to make, or any recommendations?
Could we have from another Thomas has made notes? Could he go through
Would you like
what he gleaned from our discussions first?
I've actually only got a few recommendations, but there seem to be feeling that they need to do more work with parents around ensuring they understand the progress that their children is making, not just in the last couple of years in secondary school, but year on year, so they can actually understand at any given point in time where their child is, and that kind of relates to the new vision, I suppose, that they're selling, which is children are working towards their GCSEs right from the off, right from the foundation phase.
So that's parental engagement, actually. We didn't see an awful lot in there about parental engagement, and perhaps that's something that we would like to see.
I think it would strengthen the way forward section. There was a couple of recommendations from Ron Marchant before he left, and the helping people to understand data and how it's used. For the non-statistician, and the need to ensure we analyse not just the people who are doing the jobs, but the systems that they're working within, to ensure that they're not defective as well. There were a couple of comments which are probably not recommendations, just general comments around the use of terms which non-educational people can't really, understand, and then the use of numbers as well as percentages to help people to understand the scale of certain issues as well.
If I could come in there, Chair. Some years ago, at the TAS meeting I attended, the Governors Wales, they put out a directory, which was almost as thick as this report, on the what can I say? The anagrams that they were using, the acronyms that they were using, and abbreviations, and it took some reading.
Yeah, I think the EAS already has those in place, if you like, and they do have a website. It's just a matter of accessing the website and getting that information.
Karen?
Yeah, if I could, I think we need to get something in there about the primary exclusions. It is obviously an issue that is of great concern for Dermot. It's been a great concern for this group. It was discussed extensively earlier in pre-agenda, and I think I think we would be remiss of us not to put something in there to say that we have concerns about the issue of primary exclusions, the fact that they are going up, the fact that they are so focused on a small number of schools, and I think ask that. I understand that this report isn't complete as yet. It's a but I think we could do with having something in it that indicates more of what the authority is looking to do to solve this problem.
We should perhaps include somewhere in our comments that we were pleased to hear about the joint working with partners and about the early identification and tracking of sort of key stage 2 and, early years.
The only other thing really was concern about the way in which grant aid is dropping off and how it will affect, particularly NEETs, because they are very reliant, because they tend not to be academic. They are very reliant upon outside organisations and grant aid in order to fund them to get qualifications and for them to remain included within the education process. And I think we'd be slightly remiss again if we don't mention this falling off of grant aid.
The sustainability then of the NEETs programme, really, isn't it, and the work.
Yeah.
I support that because this is a concern with grant aid dropping off from quite a few areas all at the same time. This is going to have a massive impact, and I think that we really need to know what Plan B is, because Plan A is coming to an end.
recommendation that perhaps we should see in there a little bit more detail about the progress for the 21st Century Schools work on Plan B. We're completing the Plan A, the A schools, and we need to perhaps have a bit more detail in there about where we are going on those schools.
I think more about the thing of alignment of services. I think that's something which I think that Dermot acknowledged the issues of. Well, the three he quoted were families first, communities first, and Flying Start. In another committee that we have commented about those issues in relation to early intervention for children and families, or children and families with difficulties and early intervention. And again, but the thing is, it's not just those organisations. The thing is that there's a large numbers of partners and stakeholders, call them what you will, as a few people have said, the school does not exist in isolation. The school is part of a wider area, and there seems to be a lot of people involved. And there is always the suspicion that when there's a lot of people involved, as was rightly said by Dermot as well, either everyone comes in or nobody comes in. And sometimes either we play turf rights, or there's or certain people don't fall into this department, or the thing is it's so easy to fall through the gaps that there's still. I still have the suspicion of, is there enough joined up thinking?
We can certainly put that down.
Just maybe around, I kind of got the feeling that the improvements that have been made thus far are starting to sort of almost run dry. As far as the firefighting, and now we do need to sort of change our approach. So I think you've said that you'd like to sort of congratulate, but
yeah, I think we should congratulate the department on the work that's being done. But obviously, we look forward to further improvement and get into the top 10. So we're happy to put that recommendation, say that we have made, obviously if they're assessing themselves as adequate, that we congratulate them on that from where we've come, but we do certainly look forward to a top 10 report.
But I think that's the thing which Dermot said was, yes, we are adequate, but in today's day and age, adequate doesn't cut it.
More for the work that's been done.
And I think we've run out of quick fixes, basically. So now it's all down to steady, ongoing, improving teaching and learning right the way through from, well, even pre-foundation, all the way through the schools.
I know in a school that I'm associated with that when they move to the next level school, they go with a portfolio. And for me, there should be across the piece in every one of the schools that that from the day they enter the school, there is a portfolio on the child which should follow them all the way right through. Because the issues that were raised, which are being addressed, that when children went into year 7 in the secondary setup, it didn't seem to be what they were being told. If it was within a portfolio that followed them through, that's the way forward. Now it seems to work in the school that I'm associated with.
Okay then, members, if you're happy that we put those recommendations through. Thank you very much. The date of the next meeting is the 25th of November, and we're going to be discussing the attainment. Okay, results.